Story 1. This is going to be a really short story, but I'm curious, so here it goes. One early morning, I was sleeping. I woke up to the sound of my door opening. I didn't open my eyes because I thought it was my mom who was checking up on me. I felt the presence coming closer and closer, but the whole time I didn't hear any footsteps. I continued to close my eyes, thinking that it was my mom. It touched my cheeks and patted my head with its cold hands and kissed me on the cheek before walking away. When I tried to reach out to what I thought was my mother's hand, I didn't reach out to anything but air. I opened my eyes and looked around my room. No one was there. I checked the time and it was 5 a.m. Somehow I managed to fall back to sleep until my mom woke me up. Immediately I asked her if she went into my room and gave me a kiss. She said, no. I questioned her about Dad, if my dad entered my room to give me a kiss on the cheek. But my mom said my dad was afraid of waking me up, so he didn't enter my room at all. I looked into my mom and said, "You're not joking, right? You seriously didn't enter my room and give me a kiss?" She replied, "I'm not joking, I didn't give you a kiss on the cheek." I froze in confusion because there's only 3 family members in the house. Now I'm wondering who's the kiss from, and why I'm not really scared by it. I mean, I should be because it's a random kiss from nowhere. I wasn't scared at all when it happened. I was positively sure it wasn't my mom or my dad because it happened again at night when I just fell asleep. At that time, the last person that went to bed was me. Story 2. This is one of my personal encounters with the spirit world that happened when I was about 6 years old. We have moved in one of those L-shaped flats at Camden Place, and unbeknown to my family, the previous owner had met a tragedy in that unit. This block of flats are no longer there. We found out from the neighbors later that there was a Chinese owner who, in the heat of a quarrel with his wife, who was having an affair with another man, stabbed her. The wife managed to run out of the flat and took refuge in a neighbor's flat. The police were called in and the man had barricaded himself inside the unit. Sometimes later, when the police broke into a window, they found him hanging by the rope from a hook in the ceiling in an apparent suicide. One afternoon at about 3 p.m., when I was alone at home, I met the dead man's spirit in the kitchen. I was walking from the living area and was about to enter the kitchen when I saw a head very briefly. In a matter of 2 or 3 seconds, a man's head and upper body peek out from behind a pillar at the end of the kitchen. He disappeared behind the pillar very quickly, and I remember being attracted by his colorful checkered shirt that he had on. I walked to the end of the kitchen to see who it was behind the pillar, and there was no one there. Story 3. I have moved to my new house for about 1 year now. We bought it cheaper than the upper flat, so I don't know if it really is because the people before also felt this place was haunted. I've always had this feeling, and my friends too. Whenever I come home from school, I get this chilly feeling. It's like I'm always being watched, even as I type this. I feel watched by something. I think the source of the spirits is in my bathroom. Whenever anyone takes a shower, they all feel something is watching them. I find that I can't see a mirror, I don't feel anything, but sometimes even the windows seem to scare me. I really can't stand it. I don't know if I'm just imagining things, but I just know something is wrong here. When I first came, on my first few days, I didn't like the feeling. I took a shower anyways. I looked behind me and I think I saw a hard object coming out of the shower wall. After that, I started seeing a man's shape in my bookshelf glass. After about 2 months, it stopped. I relaxed for about a week, then it got really bad. It was like the spirit had just moved to my bathroom door because the door had 4 glasses panels on it. You can't see through the glass. Also lately, whenever I look through the door of my bathroom, I think I see something dark, a shadow moving to the mirrors. Then I turn the light on and I can still feel it moving. I've really only seen the spirit once, when it was just right there in front of me. a shadow creature like a man, but I could see through it, except it had no face. I need help to get rid of it, please help me. Story 4. A lot of my girlfriends who are airline stewardess tell me about freaky hotels, but my first real one was at Hong Kong. It's a 4-star hotel, by the way. Shall not name it here in case I ruin their business. The first thing that struck my girlfriend and me about the room was the chill. We didn't have to even turn on the air conditioning. Initially, we thought it was the central air conditioning, but it got so bad that we ended up sharing the super single bed instead of sleeping in our individual beds. Next up was the bathroom. I always had this eerie feeling someone was watching me, but I didn't tell my girlfriend because I didn't want to ruin our holiday and scare her. Besides, we were stuck there for 5 days. At that time, I was still a Christian, so I wore my cross every night. The last night in the hotel was the worst. I woke up feeling thirsty and realized that my girlfriend was shivering like mad and wide awake and staring at the full-length mirror on the cupboard that directly faces the toilet. When I asked her if she's unwell, all she's told me was cold. I offered to make a cup of tea to warm her up. The pantry was right next to the cupboard, and as I was waiting for the water to boil, so happened to glance at the mirror and saw a head hovering over near the ceiling, staring right back at me. Needless to say, I ran back to bed, told my girlfriend that the flask is spoiled, and told her to sleep. The next morning, my cross disappeared. We searched everywhere around the room, under the bed, but we couldn't be found. When we finally left the hotel and I confronted my girlfriend about her cold, she admitted to seeing the head too. But because she had no protection, the thing kept hovering near her side of the bed, and she could see it even through her closed eyes, and though she tried to ignore it, I just wish she told me earlier and I would have checked out in a jiffy. Story 5. My family has a history of being able to see ghosts and experience paranormal activities. My brother and my mom have both seen them before, and I was lucky enough to never experience anything along the lines of the paranormal. Until recently. I personally believe that some people are just born with the ability to see ghosts, while others, like me, aren't as unfortunate, or fortunate, however you want to perceive it, with the gift. I also think that when your body is weak, you tend to let your defenses down, mentally, physically, and emotionally, that you usually subconsciously hold up to block out the spirit world. I've been losing a lot of weight recently, and I think I've lost a lot of my former mental capability to block out the spirit world. This particular time, I had gone to sleep at a late hour, around 5 a.m., which is not recommended, and I lay there trying to sleep. My body began to shake uncontrollably, like as if somebody was shaking my body over and over. I opened my eyes and I was very scared because I had no idea what was causing my violent shivering. I knew it wasn't because I was cold or sick, because I was feeling neither of those. I couldn't move after the shaking stopped, and I suddenly heard footsteps around my bed. But the sound of the footsteps seemed to echo loudly by my ear. I didn't know what to do, but as soon as I regained control, I quickly rolled over and told myself not to be scared. And I didn't do anything to harm anyone, so the ghost had no right to harm me. I kept telling myself this until I passed out. I've been sleeping with the lights on for a few days now. I hope going to sleep earlier will prevent any more of these occurrences. Story 6. This story happened to a good friend of mine, Michelle, in Hong Kong. She was back in her country for the summer holidays, and she was looking forward to seeing her family and friends again. Michelle has an unusual hobby, cosplaying. She loves to dress up and make up as her favorite cartoon or Japanese visual rock artists. One reason why she looks forward to the trip back home is to cosplay with her siblings and friends again. She got her wish, and she spent most of her time with her friends or siblings cosplaying different people and at different interesting locations. One night, she was up with her 2 sisters talking away in the night about their lives, schools, friends, etc. Basically just catching up on lost times. Suddenly, her elder sister, Anna, got this idea to cosplay late in the night. as the Hong Kong night scene is very, very beautiful. Why don't we go to the cemetery? After all, we always went there to take photos in the day. This would be nice for a change, says Michelle. They decided to have a gothic theme in their makeup and clothes with all the black lipstick and eyeliner. By the time they reached the cemetery, it was already 2:30 a.m. and it was damn quiet and eerie. Despite second thoughts, they still went about it anyways. All was fine and fun with these three sisters taking photos and posing about. Michelle was posing with Alicia and she felt a hand on her shoulder, but she thought it was Alicia. However, when she looked again, Alicia's hand was placed in front of her face. She was feeling the creeps by then when Alicia said, "Hey, don't put your hand on my hip, very ticklish." But Michelle's hand was not there. By then they realized that something is very wrong and started to pack up and to hail a cab home. Upon hailing a cab and when they started to enter the cab, the cab driver turned and told them only 5 people is allowed in, whereas they have 6. But who's the other 3? Ignoring the cab, they rushed in and asked them to speed up straight to home. When the photos were processed, many had this smoky haze floating about. But the creepiest were the ones Alicia and Michelle. There were 3 additional ghostly apparitions beside them, and 2 of them were holding on to Alicia and Michelle. Needless to say, Michelle and her sisters never took pictures in the cemetery again. Story 7. This story is from my mom, who told me a few days ago. She told me she went to England and had been enrolled in a boarding school near the Alnwick Castle. My mom was 14 at the time. This is how the story started. And sorry if you don't get my story, I'm really poor at English. One night, my mom and her friends and classmates decided to play a Ouija board. They swore to each other not to ask the ghosts anything personal questions, like, how did you die? What were you when you were alive? Who was your wife or husband? Later on, my mom and her friends and classmates played the Ouija board. Some people decided to watch my mom and the other people play. My mom said that they can hear the doorknob being turned, the door opened with the creaking sound and footsteps of the ghost because they were playing on the wooden floor. I have no idea how long they played with the Ouija board, but I know that my mom had kept her promise and asked some basic questions that had nothing to do with the ghost. But a girl who was playing the Ouija board broke the promise and asked the ghost about his personal life. After some time, the girl decided to go to the bathroom alone. My mom and her friends were scared and worried at the same time, but they continued playing. After about 30 minutes or so, the girl crashed into the room crying, and my mom described her to be really, really pale. The girl said something like, "I saw him when I went to the washroom. He said he wants to be with me. Please make him go away." Most of the classmates went up to her and calmed her down. My mom and her friends persuaded the ghost man or boy to leave the girl alone. Let me tell you the conversation that my mom told me about. The ghost said, "I love her. I don't want to leave her." My mom and her friends said, "Please go away. Can't you see you're scaring her? If you love her, you should leave her alone." Then the ghost said, "I won't leave." That's how the conversation went. My mom hasn't told me about this conversation in much detail, so in the end, the ghost left the room and went to another place. I've asked my mom what happened to that girl. My mom said she's in the hospital, scared of sleeping alone in the dark, and still believes that the ghost is following her. Up to this day, my mom and her friends have always warned me never to play Ouija board, and it's better to stay away from it. My questions are Ouija boards that dangerous? How does it feel like when you start playing the Ouija board? Can you actually feel the presence or aura of the ghost? I really want to try and play the Ouija board, but I know my mom's warning and have this feeling that it is better not to do it alone. Story 8. I would like to share a story that happened to me. First of all, I want to apologize that my English is not very good. I hope that you all understand what I'm talking about. My case happened about 6 to 7 years ago when I was around 23. One day in the evening around 7 p.m. while I was sleeping in my home, I suddenly felt like there is a hand moving and pressing my body. The horror feeling woke me up instantly, but then I thought it was just my imagination or I was dreaming. I must have been under too much pressure in that period, so I decided to continue sleeping. Then it suddenly hit me hard on the waist, the feeling just like there is something coming through my body. My body is shocked by electricity and cannot help from convulsing a few seconds. The most horrible thing is I heard a woman yelling, "Damn." At the time, I cannot pretend that there was nothing happening, and so I sat up checking around the room. However, I couldn't find out anything except me sitting on the bed alone. I've been discussing with my closest friends at dinner. At dinner, one of my friends became very quiet. I didn't notice it at all. He's the kind of person who is easily contacted with a spiritual thing, such as dead relatives coming back or hauntings in a hotel room. And later he told me he got a sense that someone poked him on his shoulder throughout the dinner. The whole thing is a mystery, and I've never ever experienced something like this. From that day forward, I keep sensing there is something harassing me by touching, poking, hitting, or punching me. It'll also yell and whisper into my ear, but I never really hear what it's talking about, but some single hatred, foul words. It's troubling me with a fixed time frame, and generally their power is strongest at around 2 to 4 a.m. I've never tried to contact the ghost before. I've never joined a ghost adventure or played the Ouija board. The most evil thing I've done is listening to Hotel California playing backwards. I have no idea how this is happening. I am not belong to any religion. I've tried many different methods. I've visited a priest to seek help. However, after listening to my case, his opinion is that it's not really a haunting, as he knows haunting is possession, or related to evil spirits. Obviously, my case is not possession. He suggested me to join a Christian fellowship. Maybe because I lacked the faith, because that didn't help me at all. I also found some local medium to help, but sadly they can't tell me what exactly is going on actually. I tried burning a sage bundle, taking a small pack of sea salt, and other traditional methods, but it seems that it's no use at all. I've heard many cases that people moved out from the house. It solved their problems. In these few years, I've been studying 1 year overseas, and I've already moved to a new home. But the haunting problem is still keep bothering me. As I've never actually seen it or shoot it on camera, I have no evidence of it at all. I sometimes doubt at if I'm actually facing a ghost or if it's just my psychological problem. Story 9. Hi, my name is Kevin and I'm from Canada. I have a very interesting story to tell you that I believe to be true. The story took place a few months ago, July of 1997, when I was back in Hong Kong. When I was in Hong Kong, I lived with a relative of mine in an apartment complex. We would visit some of the sites in Hong Kong and spend lots of money. We decided to go to one of the tourist sites that contained a cemetery. We arrived, and to our surprise, there were a lot of people there that day. I walked around looking at tombstones and wondered about the designs. Some tombstones were designed for specific reasons. The Chinese are deeply superstitious about these things. While I was walking by myself, I heard what I thought was my mom calling me. I went to her and asked if she had called me. She said no. Her answer puzzled me. If she hadn't called me, who did? That night I was determined to crash and sleep. I was laying in bed about to shut off my lights. I heard my name being called again. I got up and went outside, thinking it was my mother again. I walked past my parents' room and peeked in. They were sound asleep. I thought nothing more of it and went to bed. I spent a good 2 hours awake thinking about the voice I heard, when all of a sudden, I heard it again. This time I was really scared and I didn't answer the voice. It kept calling me until it just stopped. The next morning, I told my parents and relatives what happened to me the previous night. My uncle looked at me shockingly and said, "Qui Mau." My mother used to tell me, when you hear someone calling your name, don't answer back until you know who's calling you, or you will meet up with Qui Mau. Qui Mau is a legend about a black cat that comes during your sleep and inflicts wounds on you. Sometimes it will actually come and take you away. It is said to be evil and will call out to its victims, waiting for their responses. When its victims responds, the cat takes that as an invitation. Anyways, I think it's best to explain the origins of Qui Mau. Qui Mau used to be a living person that was cursed by evil and was doomed to roam the earth for eternity as a black cat. The only way it can rest, though, is to feed on humans. It can only do so if it was invited when it calls out its victims. The person who was cursed or the evil presence was not identified in the story. Needless to say, we all basically assumed it was just only a story. Did I really encounter a Qui Mau? I'd like some feedback. Thanks. Story 10. I was fortunate enough to go visit Hong Kong twice in a row. My first time being with my family in 1994, and then by myself in 1995. My story actually happened in July 1995 after going out with some friends and was on the way back to my uncle's flat. I'm not too familiar with Hong Kong, so please forgive me if I said central and it's not. This involved the section from the Ice House location all the way down to Conduit Road. I remember it was late at night. It was about 2 a.m. I was all by myself. No one else was on the escalator as I could notice. I had a strange feeling as being watched. I then saw the video cameras. It was strange. At first I thought someone was walking up the escalator fast to go somewhere quick. As it was coming below from all the way down where I began my journey up onto the escalator, it was not a running pattern of sound, but a fast walking pace sound coming up towards you. It made some kind of metallic thunk sound each time it was coming towards me. I felt the cold wind and the metallic thunk sound coming closer, but the same rate of speed. I decided to stop and listen at the level platform and peered down. Normally, if you peer down from this point, you can see all the way down clearly of 3 sections of the escalator of where the noise was coming from. Nothing was there, but the sound of the metallic thunk stopped, as if whatever was making that noise knew that I was looking at it. As I left the level landing, I continued up the escalator, and the metal thunk started up the escalators again in a more hurried pace, as if trying to catch up to me. I decided to quicken my pace as well as I started to walk up the escalator instead of letting it carry me. Until this point, there was no one on the escalator, neither going up or down. I noticed on the other side of the escalator was turned off, non-moving. Each time I passed by a security camera, I stopped for a few seconds and I waved for help as I was starting to get scared. But no one came to my rescue, nothing at all. As the sounds was getting closer, it made me run up the escalators now, and I realized that I was breaking the rule of not running, but yet passing the security camera and thinking, seeing me do this, they would come to stop me from running. But nothing still. The sound was getting louder and closer, and I envisioned some kind of invisible horror thing 1 section behind me. I did not dare to look back and kept running at full tilt by now up the escalators and started to skip over each step, concentrating carefully and not wanting to trip on one. As I got to the top of the escalator section, I quickly turned and continued to run at a full tilt. As I turned my head and looked at the escalator, I saw 2 red eyes and nothing else. I quickly remembered that there was a cafe that opened late, and I quickly ducked in there. The staff were the only ones there just eating. One elderly lady screamed and pointed at the 2 red eyes. A man grabbed the idol of Guan Yu and held it towards the door, and the red eyes disappeared. Until this day, it haunts me, and I'm scared to use the escalator alone. I later found out that this part of the mountain had a lot of landslides that have killed many. Story 11. This happened to one of my friends living in Hong Kong, Ivy, who is 30 years old, and she finally got her own flat. She was very excited about moving in. 1 week later, she organized a housewarming party. All her good friends were invited, and of course, me too. It was a Saturday, and we had a lot of fun, but we ended very late. After we had left, one of her best friends stayed to help her clean up. She sat down at the rocking chair, facing the opposite brick. She can see directly into the neighbor's flat. Just after a minute, though, she saw one man and a woman quarreling very fiercely. To her horror, the man took a knife and stabbed the woman. She was terrified. She quickly called the police. Her best friend was curious to know what she was doing. They all went out to the flat of the murder case together. A single man in his mid-30s wearing shorts opened the door. He's known as John, fake name. He was surprised to see the police but had no idea of what was going on after the police explained that to him. The police had a quick search of his house, but nothing was found. No body, no bloodstain, no nothing. Everything was clean. Not like a murder had just been committed. Naturally, Ivy's best friend thought that Ivy was simply too tired and was starting to have illusions. Ivy apologized to the police and John, and they all went back home. Soon, the second illusion again happened. She was alone at the home after work. She again called the police, but again, nothing was found in John's home. It was just a few minutes that they arrived at John's home after Ivy's illusions. So if he really did commit a murder, there's no way for him to clear everything up so quickly. The police warned Ivy not to make any more prank calls, but this time Ivy sensed something was different. She realized that John was staring at her with those fierce eyes that pierced through her. It was only within 1 week that the third illusion occurred. The scenario was exactly the same as the first two times, but this time she did not call the police. She decided to continue to watch what the man was doing. She called Kevin, her boyfriend, over. He lived just 1 block away. Kevin was just in time to see John putting the body in a black plastic bag. John headed for the door and left in the car. Ivy and Kelvin quickly followed in Kelvin's car. They reached a deserted place. Ivy was surprised to see such a thing, although she lived in Hong Kong for all her life. Carefully, they hid behind the bush. John started digging. He placed the black plastic bag in it, and then he left. Ivy and Kelvin quickly came out of the bush. They called the police, who arrived shortly. They dug the same spot and took up the plastic bag. When the police opened it, they realized that the corpse was already decomposing. It must have been there for at least 2 or 3 weeks. They gathered all the evidence and the fingerprints and the traces of hair and cloth material and finalized that John is the murderer. Just the next day, Ivy saw police arresting John in his flat. They later went to a Taoist priest and then only knew what was actually happening. What actually happened was that the dead woman wanted Ivy to seek revenge for her. And that's the reason why Ivy was having all those illusions, which is exactly what happened on the day of the murder. But after that, Ivy lived in peace in that house. Nothing happened to her again. Story 12. I am writing this after long emotional talks with my grandmother and mother, trips to temples, trips to my childhood home, and research on the internet all about the paranormal stuff which has happened around the world. My last experience happened in the northern city of India, which totally freaked me out. Then I was called to visit the Buddhist monk. He asked me a series of questions about me and my childhood. One of the questions was whether I ever had an imaginary friend. Those questions were very unusual and forced me to ask some uncomfortable questions from my mother. It was uncomfortable as my mother is quite conservative and reserved when it comes to talks of the beyond. Still, it had become necessary now. And as I called her and began to ask certain questions, she jumped to topics and asked me to stop following other religions. Then I told her about all my experiences, and I emphasized about the biblical demons existing and Lord Jesus' era. This quieted down and asked me to visit my maternal grandma in Hong Kong. I called my grandma and she seemed to have some weird reactions to my questions and described me a person named Evelyn. Well, this person was my imaginary friend from childhood. I went to Hong Kong and met my grandmother. She narrated me about my childhood days which I spent with my grandparents in Hong Kong. During the famous Chinese Hungry Ghost Month, I had made an imaginary friend named Evelyn. This baffled me as I do not remember about her now, but my grandma told me that I had started seeing her when she came to eat the food offering outside my grandparents' house. I had described Evelyn as a young Caucasian lady wearing a long grayish-yellow maxi dress. She was sweet to me and used to treat me really good. My grandma recalled few incidents when I was around 4 years old, and I was talking to my grandmother about the world wars and the loss of people and the mess which the world was in. It was that time when my grandma had realized that Evelyn isn't an imaginary friend, but real, and she is from the beyond. My grandparents were scared as they thought that I had broken some rule in the ghost month and the ghost had attached itself to me so that they had the house and me blessed. Interestingly, after the blessings, Evelyn's visits and references about her stopped from my side, but my late grandfather saw her outside the house one day. My grandma believes that Evelyn had gone angry with her and my grandpa as they had broken her connection with me. As my grandpa had described Evelyn same as I had described about her, but my grandpa always saw her outside, so he kept quiet about her presence around me. I grew up without her in my memory, and I shifted around the world with my parents, and I got to know one more shocking secret from my mother. After I had shifted to live with my parents, my mother also saw Evelyn. At first, she thought she was having hallucinations due to her medications, but as my younger brother grew older and started speaking, he started aiming at Evelyn and talked about her too. My mother freaked out when she discussed about Evelyn with my brother. He described her same as my grandpa and had described her as the same as mine description as well. This freaked out my mother to her extent, and she sent me and my brother to a convent boarding school, thinking that maybe being closer to God would force Evelyn away from her kids. After all these years, me and my brother never brought up anything about spirits or anything paranormal to the dinner table or at family reunions, so she thought everything was cooled down. But when I called her, she lost her peace of mind and decided to let me know about Evelyn since I was grown up and mature enough. So when I called my brother, he told me that he hasn't had any paranormal experiences ever. So I concluded that Evelyn is attached to me. I tried to research on any woman named Evelyn who had lived in Hong Kong in the 1900s, but found none. So I'm at a dead end with Evelyn's details. And then I had a really weird experience just when I came back to my apartment after my trip to Hong Kong. I sat on my bed, thought of Evelyn, and spoke about all the things I learned from my trip to my childhood home. I asked her if she is still stuck or attached to me because I had opened an umbrella inside my house so many years ago. My grandma thinks that this is how she got attached to me according to the Chinese Ghost Month Code of Conduct. And then, all of a sudden, I get this really warm feeling. So warm that it almost felt as if someone was pouring warm water all over me. It felt good as it is cold in that part of the world, and it was this feeling of warmth. I thought of it as yes, and that it was the first time I didn't feel scared or surprised at her readiness to interact with me. So I kept searching for Evelyn's history and her link to me. How and why is that she found a friend in me.